Okay, I think we'll start now. Anyway, good morning, everybody. My name is Graham Sibley from the Association Rental Living. It's my pleasure to host and moderate this webinar, which is going to explore some really interesting areas, I think, around mastering the planning pitfalls. And what we're going to be focusing very much on is areas around planning and viability, land acquisition. And we've got two great speakers today, both from Dandara Living. That's Leanne Allen and Rachel Allwood. I'll get them to introduce themselves in a second. But what we're going to be doing is talking about a lot of fireside chat almost, which we'd like you to contribute to as well. Please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to input any questions you may have as we go through. And if pertinent, I'll interject those questions at the appropriate time, or we can wait till the end. So this will be running up till we've got an hour in. We'll probably be going 45 minutes to 50 minutes. So if I can open this up, there will be, we will inevitably need to touch on the implications of the Building Safety Act, but just to say, we won't be going into detail on that. We have many other sessions which we do that, and we'll draw on Leanne and Rachel's deeper expertise to drive this forward. So, in a bit of scope, we've seen BTR as urban high-rise developments, but other forms of rental living have emerged, single family, etc., low to mid-rise. Before I ask the first question, could I ask Leanne and Rachel just to introduce themselves?
Hi, good morning. Rachel Allwood, Planning Director at Dandara Living.
Good morning, Leanne Allen, Land Director at Dandara Living. Okay,
great. Well, great to have you on board today. And I think the first question, I mentioned before, you know, we're seeing a rise in growth in more than just multifamily, but single family, some co-livings coming around, low to mid-rise developments are coming around. What trends are you seeing, and what does that mean in your land for A, land search, and B, availability?
I think, as everyone knows, brownfield land in urban locations is challenging from a viability point of view, particularly high-rise kit. We have found it more difficult to pick up those opportunities from a BTR perspective, but for varying reasons, gateway, build costs, etc., that everyone is well familiar with. We are having more luck on the single family side, which is a huge part of our house building business and forms an active part of our business plan. In terms of that, we've done around 300 million worth of single family deals, and we've got another 200 million currently in the pipeline. This is a relatively new sector and a new product, so new locations are beginning to open up through a bit of a trial and error approach as well in terms of understanding discounts against VPs and locations that work particularly well for funds. But more and more money is looking to enter this sector. So we actively look for sites that will accommodate single family requirements and needs, and our approach generally is tri-tenure. So on bigger sites, we'd look to accommodate circa 100, 120 units of single family, which is something that we're actively pursuing across our house building business. The other thing that we're also looking at on more of, I suppose, BTR perspective is low rise, which I know a number of developers are now looking at as well. A circa 4 to 5 story product, which can be delivered more cost efficiently because of build costs, and also we then avoid the gateway, which has huge implications timing wise. We're looking at new locations for this product. Given that it's a little bit cheaper to build, we can access locations that we may otherwise find a little bit more challenging. So circa 30 minutes to an hour outside of London, key commuter towns, in and around 10 minutes from train stations. And we need exit values. We can look at exit values of sub 550 a foot, which makes it a bit easier. The challenge with these sites is finding the ones that are big enough, because if you're looking at low-rise kit, you're probably looking at about 50 units to an acre. So that there are challenges in finding sites of scale that will fit the bill. but this is definitely something that we're looking at, that is a lower amenitized product, but offers, you know, an affordable flat effectively for residents.
So that's a really interesting area there with lower rise. What impacts that? So obviously density will be lower by doing that as well. How does that fit within your modelling?
Well, I think that this is partially part of the issue with trying to find sites that fit the bill for this product, is just getting the scale that we require, Graham. As you say, density wise, we probably still want to be looking at around 150 units at a minimum, to ensure that OPEX costs are efficient, and obviously it's appealing to funders. So there are challenges in getting sites of this scale to work, but it's something that we're working through at the minute, and we're actively bidding on a number of sites that we think could be suitable for this product.
And in so doing, are you looking at working in partnership with people on that to deliver?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have previously worked alongside developers on joint bids, particularly if there are larger sites of scale. Us as a business don't necessarily want to take on 1,000 units, but we'd quite happily look at taking 150, 300 out of that wider master plan. So we have looked to partner with developers that are delivering private for sale, is one way of doing it. I think another way of probably opening this avenue even further will be putting low-rise apartments in single-family schemes as well, at a larger number. At the minute, funds are very much driven at capping apartments on single-family schemes, but I think as this sort of cash opens up and the product opens up more, then maybe it's some scope to actually put both products alongside each other, assuming the micro-location works.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned there, effectively we're looking at mixed tenure, I guess, as well. Is so you've got private sale, you've got purpose built for rent, and affordable housing in there as well. So how is that something that's you're seeing by interjecting build to rent within the planning process? Is that helping?
Yeah, I mean, I think councils, and Rachel, please do dip in at any point, but I think local authorities are very keen to see a variety of tenure, and obviously it's very much driven from the government up as well. So that there is definitely a positive reaction if you are including some single family into a wider scheme. It also provides you some variety on your sales exit as well, so you are less exposed as a business, just leveraging towards private sale. So it does help from a cash flow and cash coming in point of view also. So we definitely look to sort of roll this model out over as many schemes as we possibly can if we have the scale to do so.
Yeah, certainly one of the arguments. Oh, sorry, Rachel, go on.
Sorry, I was just going to add to that. I think we can all see that the driver of the I was going to say new government, but they're quite old now, aren't they? The current government is very much delivery focused, and they see that mixed tenures are really going to contribute to increasing housing delivery, which obviously we've got this huge target. And I think, as Leanne's explained, that works in terms of sort of housing-led schemes, possibly with increased integration of some low-rise apartments. I think what we're seeing in terms of the higher density city centre, traditional sort of build-to-rent schemes, tenure is less of an issue for local authorities. Obviously, you know, they're keen to see the affordable element within developments, but generally, tenure is not something that is necessarily a major issue. We don't generally have any conversations about build to rent as a principle. The planning challenges, I think, for high density schemes lie elsewhere, shall we say?
Yeah, certainly the ARL's approach is very much to promote the benefits of build to rent single family within schemes, mixed use schemes, as improving the overall viability and speed of delivery as well, because generally homes for rental can and are built quicker than private sale. Is that an area where you've had conversations with partners, local authorities?
In terms of speedy delivery.
Speed of delivery, yes, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously a very good selling point, isn't it? When you're talking about unlocking homes and delivering you know, sites on a larger scale, that if you're looking at a mixed use scheme, you are able to inevitably deliver part of that more quickly because you have secured or exit. So effectively you pressing go on build, and you are putting the pedal to the floor in terms of delivering as quick as you possibly can. So obviously that local authority will then get those houses quicker. So I do think it is an attractive model for them. And I'll also just add that we've found that on wider master plan sites of a relatively large scale, single family has gone down particularly well with the funders as well, because they can already see that place is built up and there's a sense of place already there. If you're picking off parcels in a wider master plan, you've got multiple developers on site at one time. So it is very much ongoing in terms of placemaking. So we tend to find that those sorts of parcels, if we can acquire them, do actually go quite well for single family in the funding market.
And sorry, maybe this is slightly tangential, but in terms of infrastructure delivery as well within a site, how important is infrastructure? I'm talking about roads and local amenities within your bids and your planning.
So for our bids, if we're looking at a site that is obviously serviced, and we would tend to, want that to actually be put in, but it is obviously crucial that those services and infrastructure are delivered in the way that, allows you accessibility to the site, and that there are services on site that make those homes attractive for somebody to want to live in, such as schools, shops, or that there's local amenities and facilities relatively nearby. That's part of what's informing our low-rise product as well, that we feel that if we can go perhaps slightly lower on amenity, if the local area has the amenities that we're able to tap into, such as gyms, etc., there's no need to deliver one on site, because residents will be happy to perhaps use a pure gym as opposed to pay more to use your gym on site and pay increased rents.
That's a really good point. Actually, there is a debate about amenitization, particularly in multifamily. As build to rent built its reputation with almost an amenity war. It's like who could have the most. Really interesting point that you make is what is how you're reducing that as a USP, but more importantly, making it right. The homes right and in the right area that have those amenities locally, and is this something we're seeing generally as a trend that move away from that amenitization?
I think so. I mean, historically, as you say, it's been a bit of an amenity race with BTR developers over the past few years in terms of how much amenity can you get within your scheme. We are a bit more of the sort of mid-market level, where we have the relevant amenity that we think that residents will use, and a lot of our amenity is informed by a neighbourhood audit to begin with. If we feel that there is appropriate amenity outside of the scheme, we may actually reduce the amount that we're offering on site. I think now there's a driver to affordability. So residents are very much driven by being able to actually afford somewhere and get good value for money. So this is partially what's driving our like change in stance a little bit on the low-rise kit. Do we actually need to offer the level of amenity that we'd be offering on some of the high-rise blocks? Perhaps not. And we can just look at the local area and see where we can actually perhaps join with the community, or link in partnership with various businesses that are located in and around that site and offer amenity that way. We would look to offer some light touch amenity on the low-rise product, but it would very much be light touch, sort of a residence lounge and co-working, as opposed to anything else.
Yeah, that makes sense. You touched earlier about, and just to round this section off, I guess, about in areas of lower value rent-wise, and could we just explore a little bit more about how you're challenging that, how you're approaching that challenge? You've got land value, you've got build out costs against what the market will take in terms of affordability. Has that changed at all in the way you're shaping that equation?
Yeah, completely. I think previously we'd look, at sort of 5 years ago, we'd be able to look at sort of high-rise product in quite a few locations in and around London as well. Whereas now it is more challenging. So the low-rise product is being designed so we're able to access those areas that are particularly sub 550 a foot, where we can actually roll out a product that is actually cheaper for us to deliver. and we don't have the time dragon fees of the gateway. So our low-rise product is very much a reaction to where we are currently in the market and viability and build cost and all the other things that are making delivering BTR slightly challenging in the format that it perhaps used to be delivered in.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. I'm going to move on to some others. Please, audience, do put your questions into the Q&A because I would love to hear your views as well, comments or questions to Rachel and Leanne. Moving on to you've touched on a little bit the impact of the NPPF and guidance and changes there. Has the guidance that now includes reference to mixed tenure development in local development plans and build to rent specifically had any impact on your dealings with local authorities, for example, yet?
Being honest, not really. I think the NPPF revisions at the end of last year were incredibly disappointing for certainly for the higher density sort of traditional build to rent schemes in city centres and town centres. I think everybody in the industry was very thrilled to see the changes towards green belt and the introduction of grey belt, and if we're obviously talking about the rental market as a whole, that's going to be really helpful for housing and linking into single family housing sites, and emphasis, as you said, on mixed tenure that yourself and Leanne have sort of discussed prior. But in terms of, I guess, the traditional build to rent brownfield site, I think the NPPF, in all honesty, was fairly disappointing. I think the changes were, trying to focus on positives, were interesting because what we saw is a really bold change towards Greenbelt and towards getting behind delivering more homes, and I think getting sort of underneath the issue of what's always been a very sensitive and political problem, and the government has been really bold in how and sort of forceful in how that's going to be dealt with. I really hope that we see something similar for the brownfield sites, for the towns and cities. I think we are really in danger of seeing them being left behind. The brownfield sites, as we all know, really complex, they're challenging to deliver, they're costly to deliver, and there's generally very little let up, certainly on a local authority level. They want to see these schemes come forward, and generally, as I said, very positive about the principle and about the regeneration benefits, but they still want them to deliver the affordable homes, and we end up going through quite a convoluted viability process invariably. And they want things like SIL and 106 and as you sort of mentioned previously, infrastructure. So I don't really feel like the NPPF changes have got into the crux of the issue. There is still this huge elephant in the room when it comes down to brownfield viability. And I think if you go to most towns and cities and walk down the high streets, you can see as the years pass, certainly some of them are really getting left behind. So I do think that's something that the government need to focus on, and I think it links into the fact we're seeing this combination of a lot of changes coming forward. Building Safety Act is obviously really impacting the high-rise schemes in particular.
Yeah, so in terms of brownfield, obviously remediation major issue, and the like, and big costs there, which may make sites unviable. Local authorities often have land in brownfield areas. Is there scope for working, approaching and partnering with local authorities that will, they have brownfield land that they could put in as part of a partnership?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of authorities are certainly looking to do that. I don't think that necessarily makes it a quick or easy process to go through. But yeah, there is obviously that availability of resource, and it's certainly something that we've looked into. But I don't think that's necessarily magically gonna mean that these sites come forward. Obviously, local authorities have certain objectives that they want to deliver from their land as well, and that can be politically influenced. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's the major magic source of immediately deliverable land.
Yeah, and you touched on greyfield, your brown green as well. How do you feel that's defined well? Is it open to conjecture yet? How clear are we on the future of greyfield?
I think I think it is fairly well defined. The NPPF changes come out in December. We had the update on the green belt within the PPG in February. I think people are finding their feet with that. I think we're seeing appeal decisions come through that are obviously grappling with some of those issues. And I think we're going to see more. It's inevitable. These applications are going to be fairly sensitive. They're going to be increasing significantly homes in areas that maybe felt protected from development. So we are going to inevitably see a continued process of what does this mean, exactly how is it interpreted. But I think on the whole, and we are looking at some of our own greenbelt sites, and the reaction from local authorities is mixed. But we are seeing authorities that get it, understand that this change has been made, it will significantly contribute to housing delivery. And I think perhaps maybe officers are finding it really helpful because they've constantly been in this political situation of not wanting to release Greenbelt, or politically not wanting to release Greenbelt. And this is maybe helping them as well to contribute to the housing supply. But yeah, I think the next couple of years are going to be fairly fun, from a planner's perspective anyway, to see some of those decisions. And then I think we're going to see towards the tail end of Labour's administration exactly what direction that will continue to go in, because I think it's going to be really, interesting. I think we're talking a lot about planning applications and grey belt schemes coming forward and consultations, but these haven't really hit on the ground yet, have they? How are communities going to feel in a few years' time when they're coming out of the ground? I always think that actually when we talk about schemes of, say, 100 or 200 new homes, once they're built, you sort of think, oh, it feels like it's always been there. I'm not really sure that. I think the fear of development is often kind of worse than the outcome.
Yeah.
On the grey belt front as well, we have found that some local authorities have been quite good at embracing it, I suppose. There's a local authority that we're doing some pre-app with at the minute, and they're actually briefing their committee members on grey belt so they can fully understand everything about it. So that there are some that are actually trying to work with us and embrace it, and they sort of know some of these sites very much fit the bill, so it will actually add to their housing numbers if they do let a few of them go.
Yeah, very much so. Interesting. You touched there, Rachel, on local community as well. I suppose it's a whole other area we could get into, but just touching lightly on it, the interaction with communities and through planning. Are there new challenges which we're going to face, do you think, with the Greenbelt and Greyfield?
I mean, I don't think local communities are going to like it. I think it's inevitable, isn't it? Whether we're talking about a greenbelt site, a greenfield site, a greybelt site, or even a brownfield site, there's always that human nature, isn't there, that people don't like change and are, like I say, quite fearful towards change. Obviously, as part of a planning process, we are obligated to submit a statement of community involvement, so we have to at least show that we've undertaken some engagement with local communities, and I think that varies quite considerably for developers. It is something that we go into, would like to say, wholeheartedly. We go through a proper process of engagement. Sometimes people don't want to speak to you, and it can be challenging, but we at least try and make ourselves available by multiple means so that people can have a conversation. Yeah, but I don't think necessarily all developers take the same approach.
Okay, thank you. Got our first question in. Thank you, Scott Pearson. And this is touching back on the earlier discussion, but he's been told that larger build-to-rent sites are preferable because they enjoy greater financial stability. For these smaller low-rise projects, is there an optimum project size that offers reduced costs but also is still financially attractive to investors? So interesting that obviously, Dandara, you're in a very good position to answer that one. I think you touched on it, Leanne, earlier, but could you just build that out?
Yeah, I mean, we're relatively in the early days of conversations on this, but we're finding that probably want to be around 150 to 200 units as a minimum, and then going up to a lot size of around 350, 400 on the lower rise stuff. Where things can be slightly more efficient is on the OPEX front. The OPEX is probably more akin to a single family type of OPEX, because obviously you're reducing the level of amenity, etc. So that there's a cost saving in that. So we think that there is depth for this sort of product. It's very early days. There's not that, I don't think there's any fundings that have necessarily been done on a forward fund basis of this project as of yet, but we are having conversations with funds to try and feel through what they're looking for, and it's something that's been done very successfully in the States, garden apartments. So it's perhaps something that's relatively similar to that, but probably less highly amenitized than the model over there.
Thank you. Hopefully that's answered that for you, Scott. And any other questions? Keep them flowing. Moving on to broader viability. One of the areas you did touch on earlier about is working with in planning and local authorities. Challenges in negotiation with local authorities, particularly around Section 106, and other areas of negotiation that can impact viability from a local authority point of view.
In terms of negotiations with local authorities, I think again that there is this divide, isn't there, between higher density towns and city brownfield schemes and the housing schemes. Certainly in terms of the brownfield, the big issue is always affordable housing. Obviously for build to rent developments, we generally are at 20%. Some authorities do have their own targets for affordable within build to rent, so principally in London, but there are a few others. So we're already in most places in a fairly advantageous position of a lower level, but it is incredibly challenging to get to that level. So we inevitably end up in viability discussions, which can take many months. I think there is this notion, certainly from local communities, that the viability process is the developer sort of trying to get out of it, and they're getting away with something. And we certainly see pressure from local authorities and their advisors to be trying to get as much as they can. And I think there is political pressure certainly on that process. So it goes on for many months. And like I said previously, I think this is a bigger issue than looking at one city or another city. This is really brownfield sites are incredibly challenging to deliver, and there needs to be a higher level national position on viability, because the contributions that they can bring to our towns and cities in terms of obviously things like employment, places to live, obviously it's a big one, but employment, whatever other uses are in there, it might be community, but just generally the regeneration of our towns and cities, I think, should be much more at the forefront of the agenda. I think particularly when we're seeing grey belt sites, going back to grey belt, and the golden rules. We've got these golden rules in place where basically, you know, if a grey belt site is to come forward, it has to provide 50% affordable, and that's that, and there's no allowance for viability testing. What I can't see is the flip side to that. The government know that there's going to be a significant increase in housing delivery, and particularly affordable, and that's been the driver for the golden rules. Why are we not seeing something similar on the brownfield that is saying, actually, whether it's within a certain zone in a city, whether it's for a certain period of time, that we're actually that there could be a situation where even further reduced levels of affordable could, as a national policy, be implemented to support these brownfield sites coming forward. I think there's also other factors to consider, such as SIL. Obviously, in London, you know, SIL is the norm. We've got the mayoral SIL and obviously borough SILs as well. Outside of London, we see some authority areas having SIL and some not. I think it inevitably makes the viability process even more challenging, and the knock-on effect is that where you've got a high SIL bill, you are going to be looking at affordable housing through viability, because that's the only room that you do have. So yeah, I think overall that does contribute to a really timely planning process. And I think once we go through a viability assessment and we go to committee and we get a resolution to grant, we then have to negotiate the detail of the 106 and viability reviews and exactly how they work, when they kick in, what's included. And I think probably pass to Leanne on this, because I think specifically there are issues in terms of local authorities really getting to grips with viability for build-to-rent products.
Yeah, I mean, I think, speaking quite honestly, we found it quite challenging with numerous local authorities, getting them to understand the funding exits and how they are to be modelled in a viability review. There's obviously different nuances in terms of a BTR project, in terms of what you may include in costs, such as furniture packs, insurances, etc., which may not be ordinarily included in a for sale model. And in terms of the funding, there's different profit thresholds that would be applicable to that. If you do a forward fund or a forward commit, for example, your profit threshold needs to reflect the amount of risk that you're taking on. And I think there's a number of local authorities that don't really understand the models, the exit, and how build to rent actually works in practice if you are bringing a funder in. So that's actually been quite a time-consuming exercise for us to try and get authorities to understand that. We have two 106s currently, one of which we've been working on for, I would say, 16 months. It's extremely slow, not only to get engagement and responses, but to then have to try and explain and get them to understand how BTR works in practice.
So I'm getting a number of themes coming through about education, about build to rent, which is certainly something which the Association of Rental Living really understands and is striving for in terms of engaging local authorities and broadening the understanding of build to rent in all its forms. And rental living in general. I think you touched on something there which I thought was quite interesting there, Rachel, about social impact, social value, and how much that can become part of your pitch and your negotiation, and what added value that's bringing to the community. Is that something you're able to draw on?
Absolutely, we do have a fairly significant social value campaign, should we call it. We like to see that separately to the planning process. So it is a strategy that we look to implement in places that we're delivering development, and certainly multiple developments, and we look at pulling together a strategy, trying to identify local groups, local stakeholders, and seeing how we can support the local community. Again, nothing associated with the planning process. We look to undertake that as a I guess an overall business strategy, but it is insightful. It gives you an idea of the local community, what their thoughts and feelings are on various things, what their challenges are, and it can sort of feed back into the development process in that respect. But yeah, we try and ensure that we keep it separately. We do lots of qualitative things, so we volunteer towards things. We're very sort of clear that we obviously make financial contributions, but we want to get involved. We want to be part of the sort of social value process. So there's lots of qualitative things and lots of sort of lovely schemes that we support. But we also ensure that there's a quantitative assessment that sits beside that. So we run assessments against the TOMS database. So we've got the output figures, and we can obviously share those with local authorities to demonstrate that actually development is not just about delivering new homes. That's the big message that we all understand. But there are other initiatives that we as I say, we certainly support. There's things alongside that, like meanwhile uses. So while our sites are vacant, we work with local community groups and charities to support meanwhile uses. And then there's obviously a whole separate section on skills and jobs and apprentices, etc. I think that does tend to more so fit in the planning process. We're seeing more local authorities ask for employment skills plans as part of sort of planning conditions. But that whole umbrella of social value, we try and embrace. And it's really interesting because we won an award for one of our schemes in Bristol fairly recently, about a month or so ago, the South West Insider Best Residential Development in the Southwest award, and the conclusion on why we won was because of our social value emphasis in terms of how we support and deliver development. So I thought that was really interesting that more value is being attributed to social value, which I think is a really positive and important thing.
Absolutely, it's a whole area that you've almost done a whole seminar there on social value there. Thank you, Rachel, because we've run a few areas on this subjects of how is social value valued, and in fact we've got a seminar up in Scotland, up in Glasgow next week, really tackling that very subject. It's a whole other area, obviously, but really good impactful understanding there. Got a question coming in from Ed Butler. Hi there, Ed, good to have you on the call. Here in Sussex, there are new build schemes where developers are struggling to find RPs to take over the affordable element. Now, that's something I'm hearing quite a lot, but have you experienced something similar?
Yes, we have. We know from our house building colleagues that it is very challenging to get RPs on board, particularly if you've got smaller schemes and you're only asking them to take a handful of units. It's very, very challenging. We try and create partnerships with RPs, so we're able to get RPs in relatively early doors and we're not getting stuck. Because obviously if you don't deliver your affordable, you can't deliver your private. So it's pretty crucial to getting somebody on board. Interestingly, we have a scheme in Bristol. We are delivering DMR on this, but we were previously potentially looking at traditional affordable. We went out to 18 RPs and we had no bids back. So, that is the depth of the market, and it is a real problem. I think a lot of these RPs don't fully understand where they stand at the minute in terms of grant funding, etc., which can make it extremely difficult for them to commit to anything. And also a lot of them have got their own issues in terms of cladding and remediation that needs to be dealt with. And it is a problem that could halt development. And it's becoming increasingly more common to see conditionality around RPs when particularly the housing guys are putting bids forwards. That they need to get somebody on the hook before they can actually proceed, because obviously it can halt your development. So I don't think there's an easy answer to it, but it is a huge issue at the minute.
Yeah, that leads really well on to the next section of our discussion, actually, which is the impact of regulations and costs on developments. I mean, that as you say, Leanne, really impacting RPs at the moment because of its sustainability, as well as cladding and building safety, and so many regulations that they're having to fit, which is taking their development budgets away. But moving on to other regulations and costs, you mentioned Rachel's community infrastructure levy, SIL, and the impact that's starting to have. What other areas of regulations are you seeing related to completely different sustainability goals, etc.? I think there's a lot of change coming in a very short space of time. Is there any insights you could give us on those areas?
Yeah, I mean, I think you've sort of touched on that. SIL's obviously been around for a while, but increasingly more local authorities are looking at putting in place a SIL charging schedule. We have the Building Safety Act, which we've obviously touched on. There is a clear link between needing to go through Gateway 2 when you've got your planning permission, and how that then links in with when you actually start on site. We're incentivized to start on site really quickly to avoid the early stage viability review, but clearly nobody's going to do that when they don't really know what they're building because they haven't been through Gateway 2. And if they do sort of implement, shall we say, for the sake of it, they will trigger SIL. So there's no sort of joined up thinking with actually how does granting a planning permission get that scheme on site and still being deliverable while needing to obviously address all these issues. There are things like the Future Home Standard. There are things like BNG, which is obviously really easy to achieve on brownfield sites, but less so on when we're talking about the housing and the single family housing schemes. There is the heat network regulations. We have had some experience. Obviously, the regulation's not in yet, but we have had some experience in connected heat networks, which has been very challenging. And I think so. There's all those things happening, and then we've got this umbrella coming of local government reform and spatial plans and mayoral authorities. So there's so much happening in such a short space of time, and it's inevitably impacting on development in terms of physically how we take it through the planning process and gateway process and get on site. But there's obviously the investment piece that sits alongside that. So yeah, lots for us to get our head around.
It's obviously creating viability issues as well, trying to accommodate all of these ongoing changes. And it's not just build cost and cost viability. There's also like strain on time, like for example, BS 991 dropping in, which means we then have to do a drawing sub on all of our drawings and go back in for planning. Things like that do also affect how the apartments are laid out, so it can have implications on sizing and then consequently a knockout on the layout of the whole scheme. So whilst I understand the reasoning for these changes in regulations coming in, it does create issues for the developer. I think heat networks has been particularly tricky for us in our experience. Various changes have happened in sort of the heat networks that we've been dealing with in terms of ownership, and therefore connection charges have increased when we own a site and when we're actually pursuing it through planning. So there's a multitude of things that are being sort of thrown at developers on the regulation front that are causing cost challenges and timing challenges as well. But we just need to keep trying to battle through them and hope that there's not too much more to come down the line, but we'll see on that one.
Well, it'd be boring if we didn't have these changes, I guess.
Yeah, we wouldn't mind some consistency though.
Consistency would be good, and you're absolutely right. I mean, it's one of the biggest arguments we have is about consistency and certainty that investors certainly require. So thanks for outlining all of those issues. I've got a question coming here from James Pargeter. Welcome, James. And he's within the viability in Section 106 process. Are you finding that LPAs properly appreciate the differences in financial model for rent compared to the for sale model that they're used to? And if not, can we improve understanding collectively as a sector? I know you did touch on this, Leanne, but maybe worth building that one out a little bit.
Yeah, I think the short answer to that from my experience is no. I don't think they fully understand a funding model, which should be traditionally used for build to rent. I don't think a lot of the planning officers have been educated or had development workshops, etc., to try and get their heads around that. And some of the consultants they use as well are perhaps not au fait with it because they've done more traditional viability, which is a for sale type of viability. We've had sort of issues where they're trying to constantly benchmark back to for sale, but there are specific nuances in funding for BTR that need to be considered. Just simple things like profit thresholds. You may do a forward fund, but you may do a forward commit, and the risk in those are two different things. So in short, I don't think they fully understand it, and I do think something needs to be done to try and enable their understanding to grow slightly on that. And I think maybe it is developers working more closely with local authorities. We have offered to do workshops ourselves with certain local authorities to help them sort of grasp a stronger understanding of how the viability system works from BTR and just the fundamental building blocks of a BTR funding deal.
And have you had much uptake of that, Leanne?
We were looking at rolling something out in a local authority that we do quite a lot in, and nothing actually happened. So to be fair, no, Graham, we haven't, but it's something that we'd be happy to spend our time doing because it would hopefully in turn make our role slightly easier.
Yeah, and again, going back to James's point there about working collectively, that's probably an area which, as I said before, the ARL is very committed to increasing the education and understanding across local authorities, this is something maybe we can collectively lead on and support you on. Sorry, Rachel.
I was just going to say, the government have been talking about issuing updated viability guidance within the PPG for a while. Obviously, that hasn't dropped yet, and I am sort of fearful of how positive that is going to be. I think, I do have some sympathy with local authorities. It's very, challenging sort of work stream, and they generally don't have a lot of officers. Maybe one sort of Section 106 officer per authority, if you're lucky. So I think there is also this need to ensure that the advisors that they're going out to are properly educated on how build-to-rent developments differ from market developments as well. I think we can't necessarily expect all the responsibility on sort of one officer, really.
Sure. Okay. Thank you for that. One area I just wanted to touch back on, linked to standards, is space standards, which we didn't yet touch on, but the number and size of rooms that you're planning and delivering obviously has an impact on viability. Are you seeing any impact of space standards? How are you handling that in your developments?
I think there's generally a requirement to comply with space standards, and obviously we look to do that in certain authorities. Before space standards were sort of mandatory, we did have a different product, and I think Leanne might touch on that later. But generally, yeah, we're required to meet space standards, and we seek to do that. It inevitably does impact efficiencies. I question whether all standards are required for the same for different products. I think we have, generally one standard, and whether it's a house, a flat for sale, a flat for market, an affordable, whatever different type of tenure you can think of, it's one standard, and that doesn't sort of sit comfortably for me, because one standard is never going to meet different requirements. I think one big issue that I think is a bit of a failure as well is that BTR developments generally provide significant amounts of amenity space, and in our experience that is completely ignored by local authorities. It's lovely and it's nice to have, but there's no sort of offset that that these residents have a variety of different spaces that they can go and use. They still want the units to meet space standards, and they still want, particularly one thing that we struggle with is obviously single and dual aspects. There doesn't seem to be recognition that people can go and enjoy other spaces within build-to-rent developments, which is obviously very different to most markets, for sale market apartments. And I think really there should be some flexibility in standards, but the reality is that we don't see that. I also, we all agree that we need to provide decent places for people to live, but I don't think that necessarily comes down to hitting a certain square meter. It seems really contrived, and I think, particularly for those of us in planning, we sit through a lot of seminars that talk about European cities and sort of higher density European cities, and how they're achieving these densities and how they're delivering, or how they've got the number of homes. But I think if you go to European cities, they don't necessarily have the quite onerous requirements that we have in terms of space standards and, as I said, dual and single aspects and various other requirements about everybody needs to have a balcony or a certain amount of amenity space. I think, and I think that is maybe holding us back, particularly on the brownfield sites. But yeah, unfortunately, we don't really see much flexibility in that.
Okay, just conscious of us drawing time. We've gone well through this. There's 50 minutes already. Last call for any questions from the audience, please. Would be good. And if not, I had really to end on a positive note, I guess. Question to you both: what would be your key message you'd give us all in navigating the planning and viability path for rental living? Maybe one on planning and one on viability.
I think in terms of planning, trying trying to focus on the positives, we have got a government that is absolutely behind delivering new homes, and we've got a government that is also clearly happy to make some bold and maybe quite uncomfortable decisions to support delivering new homes. So I think we need to just all sort of keep the faith. We're only sort of 12 months in, aren't we? Hopefully we will see, as I say, some changes and support towards the brownfield regeneration that we've seen for the sort of greenfield, greenbelt sites.
Excellent. And yeah.
I think on the viability side, obviously we are aware that there's challenges across the board in terms of being able to unlock land opportunities for development. But we know that there's a quite a large wall of cash there that wants to plough into residential in all shapes and forms. So I think it's just about trying to find ways to unlock that, whether it be through different products, accessing partnerships or grant funding, to try and unlock opportunities and access that wall of cash. And obviously the demand for urban living still remains. So at some point in time, I think, you know, that market's very much going to come back.
Okay, thank you both for your insights and your openness in your discussion today. It's been really helpful. We wanted to explore angles on viability and planning, almost getting under the skin of that, and I think you've really done that for us, and I think that hopefully the audience appreciate what we've learnings we've had from that, and I'm sure we'll be continuing this debate going forward. I think you're right, both of you, that we must keep the faith. There is a huge demand for rental homes, and the benefits that build to rent across all of its sectors is absolutely highly regarded. The money wants to come in, but we require more certainty, as I said before. I've just seen a chat. Oh no, thank you, Sogol, for your comment there. So thank you for that. Thank you for the audience for your questions. This has been recorded and it will be circulated to you. And just to highlight a couple of things coming up from the Association for Rental Living, we've got a couple of webinar seminars and socials happening next week. In Glasgow, as I mentioned before, we're going to be talking social value there. And then that's on the 17th of June, and then in London we have another session on the 19th of June. We have a study tour in Liverpool coming up on the 9th and 10th of July, and that would be an opportunity to really get under the skin of what's happening in that vibrant city. Build to Rent is certainly taking hold there, and it's a really good opportunity to learn a lot about the realities of development and operation in those in Build to Rent in Liverpool. Please go to our events page on our website and you can see all the details. So that's about all for now. Thank you for your participation, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you, Leanne. Thank you, Rachel. Many thanks.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.